This is the Music Halls of Fame podcast. This week we honored the year in music for 1996 along with a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 1996. We look at the case for putting Pink into next year's class of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, plus our Spotlight Hall is the Songwriters Hall of Fame in Los Angeles, California. Before we get going with the podcast, like everyone tells you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll know when these podcast episodes drop, which is usually every Thursday. Now, on to this week's episode. The year was 1996. In music, two teenagers tried to blame the song Israel's Son by Silverchair for killing their parents and younger brother. Thankfully, the jury didn't buy it. Jimmy Buffett's plane was accidentally fired upon by Jamaican authorities after being mistaken for a drug trafficking plane. The La Fenice Opera House in Venice, Italy burned down. Lisa Marie Presley and Michael Jackson divorced. The first Tibetan Freedom Concert was held. MC Hammer filed for bankruptcy. Dave Gahan of Depeche Mode overdosed on speed and cocaine and was pronounced clinically dead for 2 minutes before being revived. He was then promptly arrested and ordered to spend 9 months in rehab for it. Walmart refused to sell Sheryl Crow's new album because Sheryl had a lyric about kids killing each other with guns that were bought in Walmart stores, proving yet again that cancel culture is absolutely nothing new, nor is it liberal or conservative. It's everybody. David Bowie became the first major label artist to sell a digital single when he released his song Telling Lies. David was always years ahead of his time. And Alice in Chains played their last concert with lead singer Lane Staley. Staley passed away 2 years later from a drug overdose. The MTV2 video channel launched, as did MTV India. The VH1 TV concert series Storytellers premiered, as did their TV show Pop-Up Video. Bands that formed in 1996 included Three Doors Down, 98 Degrees, The Calling, Alien Ant Farm, D12, The Dropkick Murphys, Drowning Pool, Sharon Jones, Linkin Park, Low Fidelity All-Stars, Queens of the Stone Age, Skillet, Sum 41, and Switchfoot. Bands that either broke up before their inevitable reunions or announced their hiatus included the Stone Roses, House of Pain, Take That, Four Non Blondes, The Amps, Belly, Bizarre Inc., Carnivore, Crowded House, Damn Yankees, D-Light, Divinals, Extreme, Fleetwood Mac, Fine Young Cannibals, Kicks, Metal Church, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, The Outlaws, The Pogues, Susie and the Banshees, Skid Row, Spongehead, Sublime, Tesla, Ultravox, The Velvet Underground, and Rex and Effects. Bands that reformed in 1996 included the classic lineup of Kiss, The Monkees, New Edition, Poison, Devo, Supertramp, and the Patti Smith Band. Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill was the best-selling album of the year, followed by Celine Dion's Falling Into You, the Fugees' Score, No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom, Mariah Carey's Daydream, Tupac's All Eyes on Me, Metallica's Load, Toni Braxton's Secrets, Shania Twain's Is the Woman in Me, and Oasis's What's the Story, Morning Glory. Los Del Rio had the best-selling single of the year with the Bayside Boys' remix of their song Macarena. Macarena was also the biggest-selling single of the decade. Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men's song One Sweet Day spent 16 consecutive weeks at number one, breaking the record for the longest time spent at number one on the singles chart. They would keep that record for almost 20 years. Other big sellers from the year included Celine Dion's Because You Loved Me, the Tony Rich Project's Nobody Knows, Mariah Carey's Always Be My Baby, Tracy Chapman's Give Me One Reason, Bone Thugs and Harmony's The Crossroads, Donna Lewis's I Love You Always Forever, Toni Braxton's You're Making Me High, and Keith Sweat's Twisted. In country music, it was the year of Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, who got married late in the year. Big albums for the year included LeAnn Rimes' Blue, George Strait's Blue Clear Sky, Brooks and Dunn's Borderline, Alan Jackson's Everything I Love, Reba McEntire's What If It's You, Deanna Carter's Did I Shave My Legs for This?, Clint Black's Greatest Hits, Wynona's Revelations, and comedian Jeff Foxworthy's music album Crank It Up, the music album. As far as country singles went, Brian White had big hits, So Much for Pretending, and Rebecca Lynn and George Strait had Blue Clear Sky and also Carried Away. Other big hits included Garth Brooks's The Beaches of Cheyenne, Trisha Yearwood's Believe Me, Baby, I Lied, Joe Diffie's Bigger Than the Beatles, Ricochet's Daddy's Money, and Rhett Atkins' Don't Get Me Started. In hard rock, Sammy Hagar left Van Halen. Then David Lee Roth rejoined Van Halen. Then David Lee Roth was let go from Van Halen. And then Gary Cherone from Extreme replaced David Lee Roth in Van Halen. Yeah, it was that kind of a year. The Ramones played their last show as a group. Slash announced that he was leaving Guns N' Roses via fax. What's a fax? Well, it's, you know what, just Google it, kids. In hip-hop, Tupac's album, All Eyes on Me, became the first double album to be released in hip-hop. He also released the Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory. The iconic freestyle track, June 27th, was recorded by DJ Screw and the Screwed Up Click. Jay-Z released his debut album, Reasonable Doubt. Other big albums were LL Cool J's Mr. Smith, Busta Rhymes' The Coming, Snoop Dogg's The Dogfather, Nas's It Was Written, and the Fugees' The Score. Singles-wise, Tupac had the two biggest songs of the year, California Love and How Do You Want It with Casey and JoJo. Everyone's favorite, pouring one out for my homie song, The Crossroads by Bone Thugs and Harmony was third, followed by LL Cool J's Loungin', Coolio with 1, 2, 3, 4, Something New, Busta Rhymes' Whoo-ah, Got You All in Check, LL Cool J's Doing It, Outkast's Elevators, Criss Cross's Tonight's the Night, and Junior Mafia and Biggie's Get Money. In dance music, Steve Aoki started Dim Mak Records. Stalker Ricardo Lopez tried to kill Bjork with a sulfuric acid letter bomb that he put inside of a hollowed-out book. Yeah, it was that kind of a year. Hip-hop and R&B artists ruled the crossover dance charts with songs by Blackstreet, Faith Evans, R. Kelly, and Ronald Isley, Busta Rhymes, Jay-Z and Foxy Brown, Tupac, Tony Braxton, and Nas, all of them hitting number one on the dance charts, no less. As far as the more quote-unquote legit EDM artists went, Christine W., Deborah Cox, and the Bucketheads were all big. The iconic album Northern Exposure from Sasha and John Digweed was released in 1996. Also, the Prodigy's classic album The Fat of the Land came out in America in 1996. Faithless's song Insomnia was released in 1995 but became a big hit in 1996. Underworld released the song Born Slippy. Todd Terry's remix of Everything But the Girls Missing You was also released in 1995 and became huge in 1996, becoming a huge club and radio hit. Dream Trance also became big, led by Robert Miles and his song Children. The DJ Mag Top 100 DJs list didn't start in earnest with a complete list until 1997 when the readers got to choose. From 1993 to 1996, music journalists chose, and it was mainly one DJ per year. 1996's winner was the legendary Big Papa himself, Carl Cox. In Latin music, the big artists were Selena, Enrique Iglesias, the Gypsy Kings, Los Del Rio, Gloria Estefan, Luis Miguel, La Mafia, Christian Castro, Marco Antonio Solis, and Pete Astudillo. Musicals or revivals of musicals included Rent, Big the Musical, Heathcliff the Musical, Forbidden Broadway Strikes Back, Zombie Prom, and Forbidden Hollywood. Musical films of the year included Everybody Says I Love You, Muppet Treasure Island, Evita, and Joe's Apartment, along with animated musical films All Dogs Go to Heaven 2, Aladdin and the King of Thieves, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Artists who were born in 1996 included singers and actresses Florence Pugh, Zendaya, Haley Steinfeld, and Abigail Breslin, along with DJ and producer Martin Garrix, rappers 6ix9ine, Lil Peep, Lil Xan, and Playboi Carti, singers Lorde, Alicia Cara, Summer Walker, Louis Capaldi, Jack Galinsky, Luke Hemmings, Austin Mahone, Callum Hood of 5 Seconds of Summer, Fifth Harmony members Normani Corday and Lauren Jareggi, Kevin Abstract of Brockhampton, and Jenny Kim of Blackpink. Bradley Nowell of Sublime passed away from a heroin overdose in 1996. Tupac was gunned down in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas. Other artists who passed away in 1996 included composer Irving Cesar, singer Farron Young, musician Bill Monroe, entertainers Gene Kelly, Audrey Meadows, and Minnie Pearl, jazz great Ella Fitzgerald, singer Tiny Tim, jazz musician Eddie Harris, Turkish singer Zeki Müren, Brazilian singer Renato Russo, Chaz Chandler of The Animals, Rob Collins of The Charlatans, Mel Taylor of The Ventures, Danish composer Von Holmboe, German musician Rio Reiser, composer David Tudor, musician Johnny Guitar Watson, bassist Bernard Edwards of Chic, musician Jeffrey Lee Pierce, Mexican singer Lola Beltran, Polish singer Mestislav Weinberg, musician Jerry Mulligan, composer Jonathan Larson, Eden Ephraim and Dennis Fuller of the duo The London Boys, who both passed away in an auto accident, and musician Les Baxter. In award ceremonies for the music of 1996, at the Grammy Awards, Celine Dion won Album of the Year for Falling Into You, Eric Clapton won Record and Song of the Year for Change the World, and LeAnn Rimes won Best New Artist. They don't call them the Grammy Awards for nothing, you know. At the American Music Awards, Eric Clapton, Hootie and the Blowfish, and Alanis Morissette were the big winners. At the Billboard Music Awards, Alanis Morissette won Artist of the Year. At the MTV Video Music Awards, Tonight Tonight, the Smashing Pumpkins video ode to Busby Berkeley, won Video of the Year. Tony Rich, Tony Braxton, and Tupac were the big winners at the Soul Train Music Awards. Reba McEntire and Garth Brooks won the music categories at the People's Choice Awards. At the Eurovision Singing Contest, which was held in Oslo, Norway that year, Emer Quinn from Ireland won for the song The Voice. Brooks and Dunn won Entertainer of the Year at the Country Music Association Awards, and Garth Brooks won Entertainer of the Year at the Academy of Country Music Awards. The Manic Street Preachers won Best British Album for Everything Must Go, and the Spice Girls won Best Song for Wannabe at the Brit Awards. The Tragically Hip won Best Album for Trouble in the Hen House, while Alanis Morissette won Best Song for Ironic at the Juno Awards. UMI won Album of the Year for Hourly Daily, and Nick Cave and Kylie Minogue won Single of the Year for Where the Wild Roses Grow at the ARIA Music Awards. At the Tony Awards, Rent won Best Musical, and The King and I won Best Revival of a Musical. Musically at the Academy Awards, Gabriel Yared won Best Film Score for The English Patient, while You Must Love Me from the movie Evita won Best Song. The Pulitzer Prize for Music was won by George Walker for Lilacs for Soprano and Orchestra. Pulp won the Mercury Music Prize for the album Different Class. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony was held on January 17th at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. Of the artists who were being inducted, David Bowie, Roger Waters, and Syd Barrett from Pink Floyd, and Grace Slick from Jefferson Airplane did not show up. At the ceremony, the hall inducted rock and roll disc jockey Tom Big Daddy Donahue into the non-performers category. Pete Seeger was inducted into the early influencers category, and in the performers category, the hall inducted Gladys Knight and the Pips, Pink Floyd, the Shirelles, the Velvet Underground, David Bowie, Little Willie John, and this next group. Jefferson Airplane was formed in 1965 by Marty Balin, a former folk musician who envisioned a group that blended folk and rock influences. Their initial lineup included Marty Balin, Paul Kantner on guitars and vocals, Signe Tolley Anderson on vocals, Skip Spence on drums, and Jack Cassidy on bass. This early version of Jefferson Airplane leaned more towards folk rock, but their sound began to evolve and they began to shift towards a heavier, more electrified sound with the addition of Jorma Kaukonen on lead guitar and Spencer Dryden on drums. They performed traditional folk songs alongside original compositions that incorporated elements of rock and roll, like electric guitars and driving rhythms. And this fusion was a nascent exploration of the burgeoning folk rock movement that was sweeping the nation at the time. The folk revival of the early 1960s provided new ground for Jefferson Airplane's sound. Artists like Bob Dylan and Joan Baez were using social commentary along with poetic lyricism into their music, inspiring Balin and Kantner to do the exact same thing. Songs like It's No Secret, a track from their debut album Jefferson Airplane Takes Off in 1966, exemplified this approach, blending the folk melodies with a driving rock beat and lyrics that touched on themes about love along with social change. And while folk formed the foundation for the group, Jefferson Airplane was never afraid to explore other territories. The blues, with its emphasis on improvisation and raw emotion, became another crucial influence on them. Guitarist Jorma Kaukonen brought a blues sensibility to their sound, which was evident with his electrifying lead guitar work. Additionally, the band drew inspiration from the Byrds, a group who had successfully merged folk melodies with jangly rock instrumentation. The Byrds' influence can be heard on tracks like Blues in the City from the Takes Off album, where folk harmonies intertwined with chiming guitars. The San Francisco folk scene provided a crucial platform for the band's early development. Venues like the legendary Drinking Gourd offered them a place to hone their sound and build a loyal following. It was here that they experimented with extended jam sessions and improvisation, elements that would later become hallmarks of their psychedelic rock era. Despite their initial folk rock direction, Jefferson Airplane was a band that was in constant evolution. Jefferson Airplane was a band that was right on the cusp of breaking through in the mid-1960s. They had a dedicated following in San Francisco's music scene, but lacked the mainstream recognition that they really wanted. Signe Tolley Anderson, the band's original vocalist, possessed a more beautiful, folk-oriented voice. However, Jefferson Airplane yearned for a sound that was more aggressive and reflected the changing musical landscape. Enter Grace Slick, with her experience in the psychedelic rock band The Great Society. She embodied this new direction perfectly and would become the missing ingredient that propelled Jefferson Airplane to superstardom. While their folk roots remained a significant influence, Grace's powerful vocals and rock-influenced songwriting pushed the band towards a more electrified and psychedelic sound. At this point, Jefferson Airplane was definitely right about to become much more successful. This new direction culminated in their groundbreaking 1967 album Surrealistic Pillow, which featured iconic songs like White Rabbit and Somebody to Love. The album became a massive commercial success, propelling Jefferson Airplane to international fame and glory and solidifying their place as leaders of the psychedelic rock movement. Joining the band in 1966, Slick brought not only her electrifying vocals, but also a collection of original songs. Somebody to Love, a song penned by her brother-in-law and previously performed with the Great Society band, became a staple in Jefferson Airplane's live sets. And with Slick leading the way, the band embraced a more psychedelic sound, incorporating fused guitars, extended improvisations, and a heavier rhythm section. The impact of Slick's arrival was undeniable. Their 1967 album Surrealistic Pillow became a cultural phenomenon. With songs like White Rabbit with its psychedelic imagery and social commentary, and Somebody to Love with its soaring vocals and catchy melody, they became anthems of the counterculture movement and propelled Jefferson Airplane to even wider fame. Slick's powerful stage presence further solidified her position as a rock icon. Her flamboyant style and captivating performances became synonymous with the band's image. And while primarily known for her vocals, Slick also contributed significantly to Jefferson Airplane's songwriting, with songs like Lather from Crown of Creation that showcased her introspective lyrics and her ability to craft emotionally charged songs. Her songwriting partnership with band members like Paul Kantner further enriched the band's musical tapestry. Grace Slick's arrival in Jefferson Airplane wasn't just about the musical evolution. It was actually, as it turns out, a cultural statement. Her strong female presence challenged the male-dominated rock scene at the time, and she became a symbol of the Summer of Love and the counterculture movement, embodying the spirit of rebellion and social change. Beyond their musical contributions, Jefferson Airplane was a band that was deeply embedded in the social and political movements of the 1960s. Their lyrics often address themes of social change, war, and counterculture ideals. Jefferson Airplane was a sonic embodiment of the counterculture movement, and they embraced vibrant colors on stage, which was reflected also in their album covers and promotional materials. This translated to their fashion as well, with a surge in popularity for clothing featuring swirling patterns, paisley prints, and bold color combinations like orange and purple. Fabrics with an almost liquid quality, like tie-dye and brightly colored silks, became synonymous with the counterculture as well, and these fabrics mimicked the swirling visuals associated with psychedelic music and LSD experiences. Loose-fitting clothing like bell-bottoms and fringed vests became staples of Jefferson Airplane, and this clothing allowed for freedom of movement, perfect for dancing at the concerts and expressing a rejection of traditional conformity. Jefferson Airplane's live performances were always known for their mesmerizing light shows, which featured swirling patterns, liquid light projections, and strobing effects. These shows directly influenced the development of psychedelic art, with artists like Jacqueline Reamer and Joshua White creating static versions of these light experiences. The band's association with psychedelia also aligned with the burgeoning op art and pop art movements. Op art, with its focus on optical illusions and bold colors, mirrored the trippy visuals of the era. Pop art, with its use of bold imagery and pop culture references, resonated with the band's rebellious spirit. Concert posters for Jefferson Airplane, often featuring swirling colors and fantastical imagery, became collector's items. These posters helped to define the visual aesthetic of the psychedelic movement and continued to be celebrated for their artistic merit. Jefferson Airplane's lyrics tackled a range of social issues. Songs like The Ballad of an Unsaved Mother addressed the stigma surrounding unwed mothers, while We Can Be Together spoke about racial harmony. Volunteers became an anthem for anti-war activism, urging listeners to put your head on the block and fight for peace. Grace Slick's powerful vocals delivered these messages with an urgency that resonated with the generation that was really at that point disillusioned by Vietnam and also the social inequalities of the time. Their activism actually went beyond their music. Jefferson Airplane headlined major music festivals like Monterey Pop, Woodstock, and Altamont, becoming symbols for the Summer of Love at that point. Their iconic performances, fueled by the improvisation and the psychedelic visuals, captured that spirit just as well. And they actively participated in anti-war protests and lent their support to social causes. Their music provided the soundtrack for those rallies and demonstrations, further solidifying their role as a voice for their generation. Their embrace of social and artistic freedom inspired a generation to challenge the social norms of the time. Jefferson Airplane continued to evolve through the late 1960s and early 1970s, releasing influential albums like Volunteers and Bark. However, internal tensions, as they always do, and a changing musical landscape eventually led to the band's breakup in 1972. The late 1960s saw the first major departures. Spencer Dryden was replaced by Skip Spence, returning, however, briefly, and then by Joey Covington. Internal tensions and the musical landscape also contributed to the band's evolution. Marty Balin left in 1971, followed by Skip Spence's permanent departure at that point. By 1972, with Balin gone and the addition of Papa John Creech on violin, David Freeberg on vocals, keyboards, and rhythm guitar, and Pete Sears on bass, the remaining members of Jefferson Airplane essentially became Jefferson Starship. This new group retained some psychedelic elements, but embraced a more commercially accessible sound, with some hits in the 1970s to show for it, like Miracles, Jane, Find Your Way Back, and With Your Love. Then Jefferson Starship became Starship in 1984 when Marty Balin left in 1978 and was replaced by Mickey Thomas. And then Marty sued the group so that they couldn't use the Jefferson Starship name. As simply Starship in the mid-1980s, they had a bunch of hits like Sarah, along with We Built This City, once voted the worst song of the 1980s by a magazine, and Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, also voted one of the worst songs of the 1980s by that same magazine. Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, by the way, was originally in the movie Mannequin, starring Andrew McCarthy of Brat Pack fame, Kim Cattrall of Sex and the City fame, and Meshack Taylor, who went on to do Designing Women. As for Jorma Kaukonen and Jack Cassidy, well, they formed the blues group Hot Tuna, who are still out there playing gigs to this very day. As Jefferson Airplane, they released 8 studio albums, 10 live albums, and 8 compilation albums. Of those, 8 went to the top 20, with 2 of them hitting the top 10. They also released 19 singles. Of those, 2, Somebody to Love and White Rabbit, went top 10. A lot of Jefferson's hits came once they changed their name to Jefferson Starship, but the Hall chose to only induct the original Jefferson Airplane and not Jefferson Starship or Starship. When the group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Grace Slick decided to stay home. As she said, quote, "All rock and rollers over 50 should retire," end quote. She meant it, as she's barely done any performances in the last 30 years. Presented for induction by Mickey Hart and Phil Lesh of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Class of 1994 inductees, The Grateful Dead, Marty Balin, Jack Cassidy, Grace Slick, Jorma Kaukonen, Spencer Dryden, and Paul Kantner. Jefferson Airplane, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1996, and we will put a selection of their music onto this week's podcast playlist, the link to which, as always, is in the show notes. Before we go any further, we'd like to tell you that there is now a Music History In-Depth podcast where we go more in-depth on a few of the events that happened in music history for that particular week. The Music History In-Depth podcast drops every Tuesday on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from, as does our Music History Today podcast, which goes over the daily events in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops daily, including weekends, on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to this podcast. We're continuing our look at artists who will be eligible for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for the very first time next year in 2025. This week, our journey takes us to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where this person was born and raised. On the playground was where she spent. Never mind. Anyway, at the age of 15, this lady was in a girl group called Choice. When the group broke up, she went solo and dropped her first album in 2000, which was an R&B album. From her second album forward, she completely changed her sound to a more pop-rock sound with attitude to match. Along the way, she's carved out her own niche for being rebellious without being completely off the rails. Her given name is Alicia Beth Moore. You know her better by the color of her hair from her first album, Can't Take Me Home, Pink. So, with all that said, to the tail of the tape we go. Pink has released 9 studio albums, 1 live album, and 6 compilation albums. Of those, 11 have hit the top 40, with her debut album being the lowest at number 26, her live album hitting number 13, and 9 albums going top 10, including 3 getting to the number 1 hotspot. Pink has also released 59 singles. Of those, 23 have hit the top 40, with 15 of those 23 going top 10, including 4 of those 15 going to the number 1 hotspot. Pink has sold 60 million albums and 75 million singles worldwide, with 18 million albums and 13.5 million singles sold in just America alone. She has been ranked as one of the top 10 biggest artists since this century began. She's won 136 major awards out of 250 nominations, including 3 Grammy Awards, 7 Billboard Music Awards, 2 Brit Awards, and 14 MTV Video Music Awards on 4 different continents. As far as her influence goes, once she got away from the R&B box that her record label put her in for her first album, and she found her own voice and style, she ran with it and broke the mold for what a young female was supposed to sound and act like for her generation. Now, will she get into the Hall in her first year? No. Will she get in sometime in the future? I think so. But I don't think it's going to be real soon, because there's others out there like Mariah Carey who should probably be in first. My guess is that sometime in the next decade, though, Pink will be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And just to show you just how great she is, we've also put her music onto this week's music podcast playlist. The link, as I've said before, is in the show notes. The Songwriters Hall of Fame was started in 1969 by Johnny Mercer and publishers Abe Oldman and Howie Richmond. Nile Rodgers of Chic is the chairman at the moment. As of right now, the Hall of Fame is part of the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles, California. Its hours of operation are normally Sunday to Thursday from 10:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., Friday and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., and closed on Tuesdays. There are plans to construct a permanent physical hall in the basement of the famous Brill Building in New York City, where a lot of songwriters got their start, including Carole King and the guys from Steely Dan. Even though the exhibit for the hall is in Los Angeles, the ceremony is usually held at the Marriott Marquis Hotel in Times Square, New York City. For whatever reason, it is never live streamed, so there's no visual record of the ceremonies, unfortunately. There are 14 special awards that the Hall gives out. Most of them are not given out every single year. There's also a general songwriters category that has anywhere from 5 to 12 songwriters inducted into it, depending upon the year. In 2024, the Hall of Fame inducted 5 songwriters, including this next group. The alternative rock group R.E.M. started out in the college town of Athens, Georgia, which was home to another groundbreaking group, the B-52s. College student Peter Buck was working at Wuxtree Records in 1980 when fellow student Michael Stipe walked in. The two of them struck up a conversation and realized that they both liked the same music. The two soon-to-be friends then met students Mike Mills and Bill Berry through a mutual friend. And after realizing that they all shared a love of music, the 4 guys decided to form a band together and play around town. Eventually, they started to get serious about music, so they ditched college. The name R.E.M. was picked out of a dictionary by Michael Stipe and is short for rapid eye movement, which is the dreamlike state when you sleep. The group got a local manager and went to work making a name for themselves by touring in the southern United States. The problem that they found was that since they were one of the pioneers of alternative rock, they had to build the genre's infrastructure, as clubs weren't really open to having alternative rock groups, especially down in the South back then. So, while they kept things lean by doing things like having a $2 per day food allowance, they built up their fan base the old-fashioned way. They started with word of mouth and then passing around bootleg tapes of their performances along with playing for college rock radio stations. In 1981, R.E.M. put out their first single, Radio Free Europe, off of their EP, Chronic Town. That got the attention of independent record label IRS Records, who signed them to a contract in 1982 and got them right to work recording at Reflection Studios in Charlotte, North Carolina. After clashing with their first producer, Stephen Hague, the group was able to work with Don Dixon and Mitch Easter, who worked on Chronic Town with them. Recording sessions started in January of 1983, took less than 8 weeks to finish, and was mixed and mastered in March of 1983 due to the fact that a lot of the songs were already written. In keeping with their ad hoc way of doing things, they experimented with different microphone positions, using guitar reverb, and putting drums in a different room for recording purposes. The result was the critically acclaimed debut album Murmur, released the very next month in April of 1983. That's how quick things were done back in the days. Their follow-up album, Reckoning, was done almost the exact same way, and with the same two producers. Reckoning was recorded in December 1983 in Charlotte, North Carolina again, and took only 16 days to record. The first 8 days of the month, then a 2-week break to play a gig or two, and then another 8 days to finish the album. Reckoning, which was released in April of 1984, was a lot darker in mood than Murmur, with themes of alienation and loss weaving their way across the album. Nonetheless, Reckoning was also a big success, both with the critics and the public. Their third album, Fables of the Reconstruction, is considered by many critics to be one of the group's masterpieces, but it didn't come so easily this time. Joe Boyd came in as producer this time. Joe was known for being a perfectionist on his albums, which clashed with R.E.M's style of recording. Still, Fables was recorded relatively quickly, with the session starting at Air Studios in London, England in March of 1985, with the album being released in June of 1985. Again, it was a critical and commercial success, both in America and in the UK, where it became their first chart-topping UK album, peaking at number 11. The fourth album, Life's Rich Pageant, was different in many ways from their earlier albums. For starters, it marked a shift from their post-punk emo alternative rock and more towards a more hard rock style of alternative. Second, it was the first album where you could actually hear what Michael Stipe was singing, as his vocals previously were almost buried in his songs and he was usually mumbling them anyway. New producer Don Gaiman got Michael to sing more clearly this time around. Life was actually recorded at John Mellencamp's Belmont Mall Studios in Indiana. They started recording in April 1986, finished it in May, and released it in June. This was the first album that got them more of a foothold into the mainstream top 40 radio stations, although they wouldn't get their first top 10 song until their next album. That next album, by the way, Document, was recorded in March and April 1987 at Sound Emporium Studios in Nashville, Tennessee, with their new producer, Scott Litt. Litt would stick around for a little while. The album was released in August 1987 and became a top 10 album with R.E.M. classics The One I Love, It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine, and Finest Work Song. It was also their last independent release with IRS Records, as R.E.M. then signed with major record label Warner Brothers. IRS did put out the group's successful greatest hits album, Eponymous, later on, though. Side note, It's the End of the World as We Know It was very cleverly put into the 1996 blockbuster movie Independence Day as the song that was playing when the scientists discovered the radio signal that announced the aliens' presence, if you recall. The first album that was released on Warner Brothers was Green. It was recorded at Arden Studios in late May to early July 1988 with Scott Litt back at the helm, and then was mixed and mastered at Bearsville Sound Studios in Bearsville, New York until early September. The bet that Warner Brothers made on R.E.M. paid off when Green was released in November 1988 and hit number 12 on the albums chart. Bearsville Sound Studios was the primary location for the recording of the album that would turn R.E.M. into superstars. That album, of course, was Out of Time. This album, which was also partially recorded at John Keane Studios in Athens, Georgia, took longer to produce than most of their other albums, as they spent most of 1990 working up the songs and then recording them with Scott Litt starting in September of that year. They spent a lot of time experimenting with different genres, from the funk rap of Radio Song with guest artist KRS-One to also having Kate Pearson on guest vocals for Shiny Happy People, Kate Pearson, of course, being from the B-52s, and also for them doing psychedelic rock on the song Belong. To add a little extra to the sauce, they then mixed the album at Prince's studio, Paisley Park Studios in Minneapolis, Minnesota. On March 12, 1991, Out of Time was released. Led by the chart-topping smash hit single Losing My Religion, the album became one of the biggest-selling albums of the 1990s and cemented R.E.M. as the kings of alternative rock, a genre that would rule the musical landscape for the decade. The album won 3 Grammy Awards, including Best Alternative Album, while the music video for Losing My Religion, which was filmed like artistic paintings, won the group numerous MTV Video Music Awards. While they were finishing up work on Out of Time, R.E.M. started work on their next album, Automatic for the People. They started writing songs in December 1990 and started recording demos at Paisley Park Studios in June 1991, with formal recordings started in September 1991 at Ocean Way Recording Studios in Los Angeles, California. Scott Litt again guided them through this album, with string arrangements to some of the songs actually being handled by bassist John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin fame. Who knew John Paul Jones had that talent in his arsenal? Anyway, when released, Automatic for the People became another huge smash, going to number 1 on the albums charts worldwide and spawning hit songs Drive, Man on the Moon, and Everybody Hurts. Another side note for you, Man on the Moon was a tribute to the late comedian and actor Andy Kaufman. The song became the title for the 1999 movie about Andy that starred Jim Carrey and was also a part of the movie's soundtrack. The next album, Monster, took a different route to success than the other albums. After tasting mainstream and major label success with more melodic songs, the group wanted something more aggressive and raw this time around. They wanted to take their artistic frustration and anger at the music industry in general through their songs, and to also deal with the death of their close friend, who was actor River Phoenix, who passed away from a drug overdose on Halloween night 1993, along with also dealing with the death of another good friend, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, on April 5, 1994. Monster was recorded at Kingsway Studios in New Orleans starting in February 1994 before moving to Crossover Soundstage in Atlanta, Georgia in March that year, before finally finishing in June. It was released on September 27, 1994. Behind the hits What's the Frequency, Kenneth, and Crush Eyeliner, Monster became another huge hit and won the band 4 Grammy Awards. In 1995, while on the road to support Monster, R.E.M. took 8-track recorders with them and recorded their next album, New Adventures in Hi-Fi, as they wanted to capture the energy that they felt while on the road. They finished the album at Bad Animals Studio in Seattle, Washington, and had vocal help from the legendary Miss Patti Smith on the song Ebo the Letter. This time around, the mixing duties would be handled not only by stalwart producer Scott Litt at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles, but also by Pat McCarthy at Louis Clubhouse in Los Angeles and John Keane at John Keane's studio in Athens, Georgia, and then also at another studio in Portland, Maine. New Adventures in Hi-Fi would be released in September 1996 and become another huge hit, although it did not sell as well as their other 90s albums. It also marked a few milestones in the band's personal lives, which were relatively scandal-free up until this point. First off, they re-signed their contract with Warner Brothers Records, and then the group decided to let their longtime manager Jefferson Holt go due to alleged sexual harassment charges against him by one of the band's employees. Then, drummer Bill Berry decided to quit the band due to a lot of health problems, including having a brain aneurysm while on stage in 1995 during a concert. After a couple of decades of laying low and becoming a farmer of all things, Bill joined a new group, the Bad Seeds, in 2022. He still did reunions with R.E.M. every now and then, showing up at a concert or two. To say that Bill's departure led to the band's downslide would be pretty harsh, since it probably had more to do with the changing winds of the ever-fickle music industry than Bill's departure did. Still, Bill was a major part of the band's creative process, and without him, the group missed something. They continued on, releasing 1998's Up, 2001's Reveal, 2004's Around the Sun, 2008's Accelerate, and 2011's Collapse into Now. However, none of those albums hit platinum status, with the last 3 not even hitting gold status in America. The remaining members of the band amicably called it quits in 2011 after deciding that the band, after 31 years, mind you, had run its course. They've put out special projects and done interviews to push books, anniversary editions of their albums and such. However, there's been no official reunion album or concert tour, and I suspect that there will never be. It's really just not their style. When they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Bill Berry joined them to accept his award and to also perform 3 songs with the group. R.E.M. released 15 studio albums in their career, 5 live albums, 6 EPs, and 16 compilation albums. Of those, all of the studio albums hit the top 40, with all but 6 of them hitting the top 10, with Out of Time and Monster hitting number 1, and Accelerate, New Adventures, and Automatic hitting number 2. They also released 63 singles. Of those, 20 hit the top 10, with 10 hitting number 1. The group won numerous awards, including Grammy Awards and MTV Video Music Awards. They were also known for being very outspoken on social and humanitarian issues, as well as in local politics in their old stomping grounds of Athens, Georgia. Michael Stipe, Bill Berry, Mike Mills, and Peter Buck. R.E.M. inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2024, and we will put a selection of their music onto this week's music podcast playlist as well, the link to which is in the show notes. The Music Halls of Fame podcast is part of the Music History Today network, which can be found under Music History Today on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcast from, and also on our YouTube page under Music History Today. Thank you very much for listening.